think this young man's caught some flack. I think he has. He's even come down and said, no, that's not really what I mean. Because he says Christianity, and that's a religion, isn't it? But I think at the core of what this man presents, and what so many young people today who've turned their backs on the door of the church, is for the reasons that he listed right there. You see, it's the hypocrisy of the institution and the harm that it's done. And so many opportunities, so many cases, and I know growing up myself in the church, so much emphasis was on sin and death that we got left there, didn't we? And instead, they forgot to talk about how the power of resurrection and what it should do to our lives and what it should do to the agency of the church itself and what it should be. We are a resurrected people. And last Sunday we celebrated resurrection. And it was a powerful service, was it not? It was full of power. And then it's like, well, today is Sunday and, oh well, I'm going to sleep in. Not y'all. You're here. I'm going to sleep in because it's raining. What happened to the power of resurrection? Every Sunday is Easter. Did you know that? We celebrate our holy day on our Sabbath on Sunday because we're celebrating Easter. We're celebrating resurrection. But it's hard when you're living in death. It's hard to celebrate resurrection. It's hard to live as a resurrected people when you don't know the power of resurrection. How many of you, when you were a kid, ever got the wind knocked out of you? I mean, literally knocked out of you. You remember that? Well, I've told you about my cousin Jimmy. I've told you about he and I all the time playing together. We played Tarzan, I'd be Cheetah. You heard that one? Yeah. And he would have me swing. We'd be swinging from trees, and one day I swung out and I missed. I went whoa, right down on my back, knocked all the wind. And Jimmy and my cousin Michael stand there looking over. I can see them, and I can hear them, but I can't breathe. I just can't breathe. And they're looking there saying, "Oh no, we think we killed her." But then pretty soon, little by little, I got the breath back in. I got to be able to breathe again. And as soon as I was able to get them breathe, I chased them because I wanted to hurt them. But that's the way it is. Sometimes, life knocks the breath out of us. Sometimes we get so focused on our problems and the situations and our circumstances and maybe even our church and the way they're just like dead in church too, and we kind of just give up. And we just don't want to go on anymore. In Acts, it talks about these people who are living in resurrection power. I mean, they were all there together, it says, and they were celebrating together. And it says, in here it says, the whole group, it says, were of one heart and soul. And then it says, with great power, they told their stories to one another. With great power, they told the story of resurrection to one another. And then it says there wasn't a needy person among them. And if that's not a testimony to the power of the resurrection, I don't know what is. Can you imagine what would happen if that happened today? In this place or in the church itself? That there wouldn't be a needy. We sang about the people in the African plains and the people all over the world who call themselves Christian and worship the resurrected Christ. We talk about that. What if no person in America, what if no person in Europe or Africa or Asia or anywhere else in the world where people call on the name of Christ, if none of them were needy? Wow. Wouldn't that be a witness to the power of the resurrection in people's lives and in the life of the church? And then it talks about that was their primary power, but they also had another power, and that was the power of unity. That they were all of one mind and of one heart. Can you imagine what Christ Church Universal would be like if that were true today? If folks weren't so busy pointing fingers of judgment when it's not even their job to do so, pointing their fingers of judgment and creating division among all the various streams of faith, all the streams of water. And that's why people are just dying of thirst, because all the great mighty river of faith has been diverted into little dried up streams because some people have diverted the flow and it's dried up. They say, no, you're not a true follower. No, you're not a true. Oh, by the way, you're going to hell. And it's just dried up. But here it says it was power in their unity. Their call to worship this morning came from Psalm 133, where it talks about the power of unity. And he said that power is like the oil dripping from Aaron's beard, the high priest of Israel. When they anointed him, there was abundance of oil. There was an abundance of water. It says it's like the dew of Hermon, just the little drops of dew that start at the top of the mountain and it trickles down to form mighty rivers that flow and then even make the desert bloom. Because where God's mercy is present, it's abundant everywhere for everyone. Even if we run short of oil, even if we run short of water, there's one thing for certain I want you to remember: we're never going to run short of God's mercy. First John, first chapter, verses 1 and 2 say, we believe this. We believe this. We believe in the power of resurrection. And he says, because of what we have heard. And they say, because what we have seen with our eyes, and what we have looked at, and what we have touched, what we have personally experienced. We've experienced resurrection. Not only in the life of Christ, but in our own lives. Something has come to them through their tangible senses. They've seen it, they've heard it, they've touched it. It's real to them. There's a lot of things, you really can't explain with words. How do you explain to somebody how beautiful a sunset comes when you're flying through the clouds in a plane and you watch the sun rise in heavens itself? How can you describe that unless you've experienced it? How do you describe the power of the ocean when you stand and you feel the waves crashing upon you? How do you describe that or make someone else feel that? How do you describe the taste of the first bite of a fruit that no one else has ever tasted before? And I think that that's true of our fellowship with Christ as well, and our fellowship with Christ and Christ's people as well, because we have to experience it to understand it. And we want to say, it sure is good, but we can't convey it, can we? In John's gospel that we read this morning, see, I think that's what Thomas needed. I don't think that he was, I always hated they called him down. They didn't call Peter denying Peter, did they? I mean, really, is that fair? Poor Thomas went on to establish all kinds of missions and things, and did miracles in India and all kinds of things, but he's still doubting Thomas. That's just not fair. I think he needed to experience firsthand the resurrected Christ so that he could truly know and truly believe from the bone out, And he did get that face-to-face shot with the Master, didn't he? And when Jesus opens his robe and says, touch here, have you ever noticed that Thomas doesn't? He didn't have the need to when he had the chance to. Simply the presence of Christ brought him down to his knees. And what did he cry? My Lord and my God. He experienced him. He experienced the power of resurrection and the reality of it. You might say, well, if I'd been there, I wouldn't have had to do that. I just would have believed it. But if you look carefully into your own mind and heart, I believe you'd think, that's just not so. We all have occasion to doubt from time to time. We love Jesus, but sometimes I think we doubt the power of resurrection. On the evening of that first Easter, the disciples, you see, were meeting in a room. Meeting in a room where they had held their Passover, you see. The door was bolted and shut. They were frightened. They couldn't get their bearings. They didn't know what to do next, you see, because life had just absolutely knocked the breath out of them. They had given up that evening to follow Jesus, and you know, they didn't know what can we follow that doesn't exist anymore? What can we do? When just only a week before that, they had entered the city with these huge high hopes. I know some of the children said, hope is the beginning of faith. It's so intrinsic to it, you know. Hope, believing that things will get better. You know, this was a disaster. It was crazy. It was like a car crash or a sudden ending, and it knocked the wind out of it. It was like falling from a tree or having one of those life events that leave us breathless. And on that first Easter evening, Jesus came to them in that locked, airless room and breathed new life into them. And I think you and I at one time or another have been like them. We too have had the wind knocked out of us. Some of us gathered here have lost loved ones and have lost them suddenly. Some of us in this place are diagnosed with a long-term illness. Some of us have been diagnosed with catastrophic illness. Some of us have lost jobs in the last couple of years. Some of us have lost a sense of our financial security. I'm sure every one of us here at one time or another has lost that promotion or something. Our relationship has failed or ended abruptly and we just didn't know what to do next. All of us have had the wind knocked out of us. And when you get the wind knocked out of you, all you can focus on is trying to take a breath. You're focused on trying to survive, to take one more breath. Anything personal or anything emotional becomes too difficult to believe in or to focus on. And that's difficult because you know we are a feeling-centered generation. We are very concerned about our feelings And so our feelings about the church and our feelings about God and our feelings about things is sort of mixed in with the facts about faith. Because somehow we've managed to make a split between our head and our heart and our psyche. So if we don't feel right about things, somehow we begin to not feel right about God, and we don't feel right about the church because life is overwhelming us and we're not feeling right. And somehow here in America, we've transferred faith from the realm of fact into the world of feelings. And the problem is sometimes you and I just don't feel like believing anymore. Or maybe our experiences that would make us want to believe in God are few and far between. Or maybe non-existent. Maybe the actions of the church in the world might cause us to disbelieve. Our experience of the church would make us want to walk away from the church. Anybody ever have that experience here? Because when somebody's holding up a sign that says God hates facts, you're going to hell at the end of every pride parade. That sort of knocks the wind out of your sails, doesn't it? I think Jesus did something else in that room with the disciples. He said he came to send them just as the Father had sent him. And he reminds us that wherever they go, or wherever we go, he's going with us. And he says, I'm sending you, but I'm also going with you. And just as the Creator filled the lungs of that first human being with air, the very air that we breathe gives us life. And then he gave them a second calling, to not only go out and proclaim the gracious love of God to everyone, everywhere, but he said something else. He said, forgive. He said, forgive sins. Forgiveness is a powerful, powerful, life-giving. I don't think you can feel the power of resurrection if you're not able to forgive. You have to forgive yourself so you can be free to live in the power of the freedom and not in the bondage of guilt and sin and death. You've got to step out because you've been already forgiven, so you have to forgive yourself. You can't forgive and extend God's gracious love to another if you're still holding on to grudges with that person. You can't be free either. You have the weight of the world pressing the breath out of you. Just the same. We're called to forgive. And all this says that it doesn't depend. It's God's choice, you see, to love us. It's a choice that God made. And there's nothing that you can do or anybody else can do that will undo that. You've been forgiven. And there's nothing you can do to undo it. It's done. I agree with that part of the video, do you? When Jesus said it's done, I believe he meant it. It's done. So we need to be done with it too. whether God is involved in our lives or whether God is not, it's not dependent on our plans and schemes. It doesn't matter if things are working out for us or not. God's still involved in our lives. But again, that's God's choice. God's choice has already been made, and there's nothing that we can do to unmake it. All the disciples, Thomas and the others, had an advantage. That first century church had an advantage that we don't have, because they actually could see with their own eyes the power of the resurrected Lord. But we have an advantage that they don't have. One of them is that you're sitting here today in this place praising God. You are here just as you were created, praising God, listening, growing in your faith. The fact that this place is here is a testimony of the power of the resurrection. Remember, on Good Friday, I asked you to reflect on Holy Saturday, to just drive down the street and look at all the places that would be missing if Christ had not been resurrected. Do you realize how empty this city would be? How many institutions were founded because of the resurrection? Would this church be here today? No, it would not be here today. We didn't see the fact, but we live in the power. And the power of the resurrection is still going strong 2,000 years later. And it's not because of us. It's because of God. And we've been called to continue to go out and to share that message that God loves every single person. And for us to take any fingers of judgment, put them in our pocket. And any grudge or error or aggravation that we have, or hurt that we have, we need to forgive so that we can be free and to live in that freedom and the power of that. May it be so for you and for me and all these young people. Let us build a church where they can say that they know that Jesus is loved here because Jesus is greater than anything we can do to mess it up. Right? Amen.